Okay, so hi, I'm Simon for Insert Past Pun here, and I'm here with ShadowSwimmer77. Say hello.
Hey, how's it going, Simon? Thanks for having me.
Nah, it's all good. It's all good. So let's get straight into it then. So tell people listening, who are you? Sort of, how will people know you?
All right, so you may have seen some of my stuff online. I'm not sure. I try to get it on as many different websites as possible. I've got stories on the Creepypasta Wikia, which is where I kind of started posting, but since then, a lot of them have made their way over to creepypasta.com, .org. I've posted pretty much everything I've got on No Sleep, and then there's a couple newer sites, creep.ee and creepypasta.xyz, that I've also started putting the stories on. So pretty much as many of different ways as I can get out there. I've had a bunch of my stories narrated from different narrators. Have not gotten one from Mr. Creepypasta or Creeps McPasta yet, which is cool. But a lot of other really, really talented narrators. It's always such a kick to have somebody take their time and talent to adapt my work. Had a Creepypasta Junior's done a couple. Dr. Creepin, Creeperoni, few other and several others. But so yeah, my stuff's out there. Trying to do as much as I can to make sure that it gets to as wide an audience as possible, and just hope people enjoy what they see.
Nice, nice. I say, I've always feel like getting it up on Mr. Creepypasta or Creepypasta is kind of like hitting the big time. But
They, they get a lot of views.
oh yeah,
So
definitely. So how long have you been writing for?
writing, it's kind of weird. So I've written for a long time, although I do have a day job. It is not writing. It has nothing to do with writing. But I've always kind of kicked around just for fun. The most current round of stories really started back in 2011. What I'm mostly working on now is a series of standalone, interconnected stories that I've come up with a fairly unoriginal name called the Wicker Saga for all of them. But the very first story I wrote for that was called The Wicker House, and that was about this time of year, way back in 2011. And I didn't at the time have any kind of an idea that I wanted to do any kind of like a big series or anything, but it was in the Halloween-ish type season. I wanted to write a ghost story, so that's kind of how that all started. But so since 2011, I wrote that story. I took a couple years off. My job was pretty intense for a couple years, and then it kind of petered down a little bit. So maybe about 3 years ago now, I sort of dusted that one back off. I found the Creepypasta Wiki, and that community there. And so since then, I've kind of on and off as things allow. I've been putting out stories pretty much ever since then.
Awesome, awesome. So, like, do you exclusively write horror, or are there any other genres you like to write?
So I do pretty much just exclusively write horror right now. I've had some folks that have read my writing look at it and say, "Wow, 'cause you might be really good writing some other things," because I do. I try to incorporate different styles into the different stories. The Wicker House that I mentioned, that one was supposed to be a pastiche for H.P. Lovecraft, big Lovecraft fan, and I wanted to write in his style, and so that was that one. And actually, the story we're going to talk about a little later today, Tunda, deals with the same character, and that's another one that I try to write in more of like an old-timey style. I've got some other stuff, a story called A Bad Night, that is more noir-driven. It's the hard-boiled detective. The good folks over at Midnight Marinara actually did a really in-depth, very cool analysis of that one a couple months back. I've got a couple sci-fi type horror stories, Lights, The Lonely Stars, and really, so I dabble in a whole bunch of different genres, but the kind of challenge I've given to myself is not only to make all of them, coherent and put some kind of a horror element with them, but I'm also trying to somehow make them all kind of tie into each other. And the farther into this little experiment that I get, the more challenging it really is. But yeah, so far it's a long answer to a pretty basic question. But yeah,
No, that's all good. We enjoy a long answer here. It's all good. So I mean, so in terms of horror, I mean, what sort of horror do you like to write the most? What really gets you going?
really anything. I mean, it's the thing about horror that I find fascinating is that you can make literally anything scary. There's so many things in this crazy world. I mean, you don't even need to make anything up. I mean, there's so much ridiculous things out there. Just looking at the news or anything else, and as I think I'm best at writing a little bit more old-timey stuff. The Wicker House is still one of my favorite stories that I've written, even though that was the first one. But I also, my buddy Humboldt, Lycanthrope, actual name is Matt Brockmeyer. He's got a book out, but he thinks that I'm really good at writing noir. I've got a couple of those. So A Bad Night's one of them. So it really just kind of, I don't know. Those are probably what I'm best at. What do I like writing? I really kind of got to wait and see what kind of idea hits me, and then I'll just sort of run with it and see where it goes.
Nice, yeah, I know what I mean. I heard was it A Bad Night through Midnight Marinade myself, and because you don't get much horror in a noir style, I don't think, and well, especially not in the creepypasta world. And
Right.
so, yeah, exactly. And I sort of really enjoyed what you did with that one. I'd say it was good.
I will say one thing I'm not good at, and I think part of, or I don't particularly like, which is frankly I think part of the reason that I have a hard time, like No Sleep. I have a terrible time on No Sleep. I've got some very dedicated readers over there that they love what I put out, and they're very supportive and everything else. But man, as far as like the number of upvotes and stuff I get, I mean, if I get 20 upvotes on No Sleep, I'm happy, because that's about my limit. I'm very bad at the traditional, what creepypasta originally started at, which was the urban legendy, this story might be actually real. Is it made up? Is it real? I mean, my stories they've got a. Frankly, I'm surprised that the mods have accepted as many of them on No Sleep as they have. Frankly, just because they have that rule over there where this has to at least be somewhat capable of happening. I've got one story, The Fishing Trip, which frankly, best ever narration. Buddy of mine, Abysme, who I think you had on a previous show.
Oh yeah.
No longer. When that man walked away from narrating creepypastas, the sad thing is not enough people watched his stuff. But man, like if we lost a friggin' treasure from the community right there, because single favorite narration ever done. Not a great story, The Fishing Trip, but what he did with it was fantastic. Anyway, long story short, the story ends with a giant sea creature, literally the size of a mountain range, rearing up from the sea and killing the narrator. And it's like, well, that couldn't really happen because for lots of different reasons. The smallest one being that now the narrator couldn't obviously be writing the story and sharing it on No Sleep. And yet there it is. So yeah, so just this whole most of my stories, you are not going to read them and kind of have that notion of, oh wow, man, I wonder if that actually happened. It's more, I found creepypasta, and it is the most, I guess, currently active community for sharing amateur horror writing that I've come across, and so that's really kind of what I'm looking at doing. But as far as trying to write the next, I don't know, pen pal or even like the Slender Man stuff, no, there's none of that idea that'll give you maybe really thinking about, wow, is this actually what is real life and what is fantasy kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I understand. So, I mean, what writers do you sort of take your inspiration from, would you say, for when you're writing your stories?
So, I already mentioned Lovecraft. I love
Everyone
Lovecraft.
loves Lovecraft.
How can you not? I mean, he is one of the quintessential American horror writers. He did everything. So I really enjoy him, and I like, specifically for him, the language is always kind of beautiful, although he is, man, I've fallen asleep trying to read Lovecraft plenty of times too, just because it's so dense. But I really liked his whole mythology, that the notion that you have this, he doesn't reveal everything, right? Like he's got this kind of underlying sort of evil pulsating just beneath the surface that your sort of unwitting narrators kind of touch on a little bit, but they never really. You get glimpses of it, and half the time that sends you reeling into madness, kind of thing. So I really like that. Stoker's Dracula. I don't like a lot of Stoker stuff, but man, I grew up reading Dracula, and that's just fantastic. And I've taken a little bit of inspiration from that. I like the idea of, I mean, Dracula is really a whole bunch of different stories, right? It's different characters in different forms of media, giving you different little pieces of the story and kind of tying it all together. And so that's sort of what I'm doing with my Wicker Saga stuff, is that I don't think I've had the same character hasn't narrated more than one or two stories, and right now I think I'm sitting at about 17 in the series. So there's there's a lot of different things, and you could read any individual one and be like, okay, that's a story, it ends there. But then if you read some of the other ones, you start to see oh man, I know who that character is, or whatever. I've seen that before. Right. So yeah. I like that from some Stoker. Jim Butcher, not straight horror, but the Dresden Files.
I love the Dresden Files.
It is by far my favorite series in the world, and it's not certainly the most intellectual. It's popcorn movie stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the world building the guy does, and the fact that he can put little details in a book that 10 years later, all of a sudden, there's the payoff, and it's just like, oh my God, that is just amazing. Just the detail that he and the characters he creates and everything else. And so big fan of Jim Butcher. Also like Stephen King, the modern horror guy. A little bit his idea of the Dark Tower. I haven't seen the movie. I heard lots of bad things about it.
Yeah.
Although it was amazing, just as a little tangent. I don't know if you caught it yet, but it's breaking all these records.
I have. I absolutely loved it. I loved it.
Fantastic. So I like his idea. I mean, that kind of helped prompt that idea too of, hey, look, you can have like some kind of center spoke running through this universe, and you've got all of these different stories that they kind of tie into that center spoke, but at the same time they are self-contained. And you can read a Stephen King story, and you don't need to know that there's 50 other stories that somehow tie into this thing. You don't need to know that the priest from Salem's Lot meets up with a gunslinger down the line. Like nobody, that doesn't matter. So those guys mainly. I like lots of the other classic guys. I mean, Clive Barker is just crazy, but in the best possible way. Blatty, like in his Exorcist stuff. I try to read a lot of the classics. I tried to read A Turn of the Screw not too long ago. I made it about halfway through, and just again the writing was very dense, and my overdue fines at the library were starting to tally up, so I had to take it back. But still appreciated the atmosphere and everything else that they create. So just really anywhere I can find it, but those are probably the main influences that I.
That's cool. And is there sort of like anywhere in particular you take your inspiration from? I mean, personally, with my writing, I tend to listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, things like that. And I tend to like a lot of the stuff I do is rewriting true crime stuff. I mean, is there any sort of like thing that you like to draw on for your stories?
Honestly, for inspiration, so I don't write a lot of stories unprompted, which is really part of the reason that this stupid thing has been taking 6 years to write. And part of the reason that I've really enjoyed kind of hooking into the creepypasta community and stuff is because they have these different contests and events and everything else that sort of give you an idea. And so probably about, I don't know, I mentioned I think there's like 17 in the series right now, but of those, probably about 10 or 12 of them have actually directly come from prompts from various contests or whatever else. And so A Bad Night actually was the first was one of the first ones that I wrote. That one was a detective loses his job. Yeah. And the story from Humboldt, actually that was about the same time that I first talked to Humboldt, and his story, The Long List, that we're going to talk about a little bit later, was a product of that exact same contest. It was by a guy named Black Number, who also an author, very good. He had a freestyle pasta competition. These things were, hey, you get a topic and you have 24 hours to write. I think it was like a 3,000 word story. Go.
Nice.
And so I'll mention that again when we're actually talking about it. The fact that this story that we're going to be talking about is so good, and it was written in 24 hours. With a one-line prompt is just crazy. But for me, yeah, I mean, a lot of the times I'll sit down and I'll be like, I need to write today, and then I'll get like a couple lines out, and I'll say, I'm going to go surf YouTube or see what's on Netflix, whatever. But then if there's something like, oh, hey, now there's a contest happening. Humboldt actually is planning on hosting a werewolf contest over on the wiki. I think later this month or next month, if anybody is interested in participating in that. So it's gonna. I've started with that in mind. I've started trying to come up with some ideas for a werewolf centric story and just kind of go from there. But as far as just in general, inspiration, no like hard, like no like listening to music or anything like that. Unless one of my songs, for example, Her Red Right Hand, that was part of a song contest. Everybody was given a song that you were supposed to write a creepypasta about. Mine was Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Yeah.
Not actually His Red Right Hand, oddly enough. It was actually the Song of Joy, which I had never heard of Nick Cave before this contest, and now I'm totally afterwards I was shocked I hadn't. But just so there's definitely some crossover with some of his material. So yeah, so music. But one thing I like to do is take one of the biggest criticisms on a lot of these creepypastas that people put out and everything is like, man, there's so many tropes, or it's so overdone, or oh, it's just like, oh yeah, I saw where that was coming a mile away, or it's just, and I agree, but I don't think it's because that the twist or even like the narrative framework is bad. I just think that the writing isn't great. Not to say that I'm the best writer out there, because I'm definitely not. There's so many other people that are just. I mean, if I were the best, then I'd be getting paid for this stuff instead of just writing. But I think that that you can take something that has been done 100 million times before, and if you do it well and you put your own fresh kind of take on it, that it can feel new. And so that's really what I like. None of my stories, there are so many. I mean, and I don't even necessarily know it at the time, but I'll look back later on. The story today we're going to talk about is sort of reminiscent of the movie The Thing. Didn't even realize it at the time that I was writing it, but there's a character that's like a guide or a bodyguard in it that I just came up with what I thought was a badass sounding name in Lyle McCready. Well, then like a year later, I'm rewatching John Carpenter's The Thing, and I hadn't realized it at the time that Kurt Russell's character's name's McCready in it. Like,
I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, so people really, so that's one. Figure in the Fog is another one of my stories. That was another contest one. I was given that title and told to write a story about it. I worked it into the Wicker House. Very reminiscent of some of the scenes from Salem's Lot. Another of my stories, Sarah's story, I've been told is an uplifting version of The Shining. There's just lots of different places that I don't even necessarily think about it as I'm writing this stuff, but I've had I've loved horror since I was I was 3 years old when I got into the real Ghostbusters, and scared myself silly watching those cartoons, and so I've always loved just vampires and werewolves, and I've watched so many movies and read so many short stories and books and everything else that honestly I don't even remember where half the stuff comes from. And then I'll write something and I'll come look back at it later and say, wow, this is actually pretty similar to something that I had actually absolutely no intention of doing when I was writing it, but there it is. So
that's cool. It's nice to know we're of the same generation to be watching real Ghostbusters as well.
It's the best. It's the best, man. My mom and dad still. I've got all the old toys at my mom and dad's house. My mom keeps threatening to make me take them with me sometime. So I don't know.
At least you get to play with them again.
Well, I've got a daughter now, so you know, I'm just waiting. I've started hooking her onto the cartoons, and so one of the times I'm gonna go visit the grandparents, and I'm just gonna have to bust those all down from the attic and just blow her mind. So we'll see.
Nice. So yeah, so I'd say, I mean, let's talk about the sort of the story you sent over then. So the story sent over was Thunder.
Yeah.
I'd say for those listening, I'm going to put a link to it in the description. I would highly recommend you read it first. I really like the story.
Thank you.
It's all good. As I say, I mean, I do particularly like the sort of the historical diary sort of style of creepypasta. It makes it feel more real for me.
Sure.
Especially, and I'd say, so give us sort of a sort of overview of the story then.
Okay, so there's actually how the story sort of came to be is I find it a little bit interesting. Again, I'm always looking. I don't really care if I ever get paid for this crap, but I take very much enjoyment in knowing that there are actually other real life people out there reading my stuff, and so I'm always looking for new websites or new. I'm constantly emailing narrators to say, hey, you want to adapt this? And you know, probably some of them are probably annoyed by the number of emails. This one I actually found a site called the Writers Arena, which unfortunately they are no longer. They took a hiatus from doing this, but basically it was a few guys that were writers, and they as many of us kind of get from time to time realized that they needed a little bit of motivation to actually kind of get themselves writing, and so what they started to do was they opened it up to other people. And you could send in a sample of your work, and if you got selected, the way it would work is that one of them, I forget if it was every month or every other week or something, so one of them would host it, and they would come up with an idea of just a prompt. And then another one of the three guys that found it would write a story based on that prompt, and then one of their guest writers would write a story. And then those two stories would be kind of held up against each other, and then so they'd have a guest panel of judges that you get the judges that would weigh in, and then also there was like a community vote, which I think part of the reason they may have stopped is because they weren't getting. I mean, they were getting maybe 10 to 15 people voting, so it wasn't. Unfortunately, trying to break into the scene is crazy hard. But so yeah, just a really kind of a neat thing. Well, so I sent in actually the Wicker House to them. They accepted it, and I said, "All right, let's do this." Well, so the topic was coffee.
Nice.
And that's not really it's very vague. And it's cool because the other guy so I ended up winning the popular vote, but both of the judges they voted for the other guy, which is fine. I mean, you don't get anything for winning or losing, but the nature, the fact that was the topic, and I mean, you can write anything, any genre. It doesn't matter. It is not a horror exclusive website or anything like that. The other guy wrote a very cool story, very Mad Maxy dystopian future where you've got these caffeine tweakers, and then the lead character finds himself in like this, so that kind of thing. So that was for me. Again, I've been writing several of these Wicker stories. I had not too terribly, maybe 8 months to a year before this, kind of come to the decision that I was going to try to figure out a way to work everything that I wrote into this sort of overarching narrative. And so, yeah, I kind of had this idea of, man, how the heck am I going to do this? And so I had this character, Thomas Wicker, of the same guy of the Wicker House.
Yeah.
And he had the Wicker House kind of details the end of his story, but I hadn't really delved a lot into his past. It's indicated that he has some kind of dealings in his youth with the supernatural and the occult and everything else, and so there was a story to be told. And I'd previously established that this guy was very rich. His family, had money, and they had all these different, stuff all over the world, like different oil fields and everything else. And so it's like, you know what? A coffee plantation. Boom. There it is. He's got a coffee plantation in South America. And so then I said, okay, well, if it's a coffee plantation in South America, I could just go the route of, I'd come up with some kind of what's happening. There's going to be something that's going on down there that he needs to go investigate. And could have gone with like just a traditional, vampire or something, but I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to take some kind of supernatural entity that maybe a few people haven't actually heard of, and try to work that into the story. And so that's where the name Tunda is actually this Colombian and Ecuadorian sort of mythological folklore-y kind of creature, and that's kind of where that whole inspiration came from.
Nice, yeah, because that was what I was going to ask. I said, because I wasn't, as I did do a brief search, but yeah, I wasn't sure if that was actually something you'd made up or whether that was that was something that already existed. But
Yep, yeah, and I actually I don't always do research, but occasionally I do. And this one, yeah, I actually did do a little bit of research. There's a wiki entry and everything on the thing, and a lot of the so there is one thing I'll say about this story is it is a little exposition heavy. But Wicker does kind of some of the background that he gives on the creature and stuff. That's all straight from the different sources and everything else that I found about this folklore. So that's all straight up. That's all actually accurate as far as I know. So
nice. And so where did you sort of I mean, obviously, I know it's part of sort of a larger series, but with this story, where did you start? Like, did you? Because I know it's got like the really classic, really great end line that a lot of good creepypasta has. I mean, did you? Where is it that you started with the story?
So I have a really, really bad writing process. Insofar, it's one that I would not recommend to anybody. I tend not to plan things out too much. Insofar as for this story, I will literally sit there and I'll write like the first line, and then I'll just kind of go wherever, like I'll keep going, and I'll edit as I go typically, which makes it a little bit easier when I get to the end, because I don't have these massive rewrites or grammatical issues because I'm doing it, but it makes it take a lot longer to write and get the ideas out there. But I didn't really have a great idea of exactly how the story was going to go when I first started writing it. I knew that I was going to have this creature, and that somehow he was going to have to give some background, and he was going to get down there. But kind of beyond that, I didn't really have a lot. So yeah, I pretty much just sat down. I think I'd had a day off that day, so I dropped my kid off at preschool, and I went over to this little cafe that's kind of by there. She only goes to school for a couple hours, and I sat down and I just kind of started writing and banging this thing out, because I think I had like 10 days to write it. So a little bit more time than the 24-hour challenge.
Yeah, yeah.
So relatively tight window. And yeah, I just kind of went there, and it's like, okay, well, maybe just wanted to establish his character. So we get into kind of some talking about a little bit how he's kind of a fop, right? He's involved with the supernatural, but man, he is not hardcore.
Yeah,
he is not he is not monster hunter extraordinaire. He is this rich dude that's had a pretty easy life, that doesn't really like getting his hands dirty, but he's fascinated by this stuff, and he's had some exposure to it already, and so now it's almost an obsession. But he still isn't particularly good at it. And so that's just kind of how I went from there, and it evolved, and eventually, if I have a real regret with it, is that there is a word limit. I think it was like a 4,000 word limit or something, and so and that's part of the problem with writing the way that I do, is that a lot of these contests do have word limits, and so I'll start out, and if I don't have a real clear direction where I'm going, I'll find out, oh man, I'm like 2/3 of the way through my word count, and he's just now getting to the plantation. I got to wrap this thing up. And so that's kind of what happened on this one. So I think I dislike a little bit the pacing of the second half of this, and that's at least partially due to the fact that that I was working with a word count and a time limit on when the story was due. But other than that, yeah, it was just things that sort of came together, and then I had started out the story with the one line, "There's 1,000 ways to die in the Colombian rainforest," and I just thought, you know what, I can kind of put a twist on this at the end.
Nice.
And that's how that kind of came into being.
No, that's really cool. So, I mean, I speak to so few writers who actually do it organically. I'd say. I mean, I'm terrible. I can't do stuff organically. I have to just sort of definitely plan it all out. So I'd say it's really interesting to hear of someone who actually is able to do that and do it effectively as well.
And it's even worse though, right? Because like I said, I'm trying to tie all this crap together, and so I'll have these really out there ideas, and then I'll be 2 stories later down the line and being like, oh my god, I put this one detail in there. How the heck am I going to work that into this in a way that it makes sense? Like it's not, that I'm not just, I hate Deus Ex Machina stuff. I hate going back and altering things after the fact, and or I don't like to cheat the audience, right? I think the whole most of the time, if you see things in my stories, then that's kind of what it is. I'm not going to be like, oh nope, he's actually alive, and although it's like no, if they're dead, they're dead. Unless you actually don't see them die, then that's the one thing I'll say. If the character just assumes, oh man, that stuff they collapsed in the burning building, surely they're dead. You do need to see the body, but and it's not even just in the in individual stories. It's with this whole bloody mess that I've got. I think I'm up to about somewhere between 80 and 90,000 words for this whole thing so far, and I've got like some ideas for how I'm going to sort of start to wrap it all up, but it's going to be a little organic too, and it's kind of intriguing and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, so. I bet. So, I mean, with this one particular story, I mean, were there any blocks that you came up against whilst writing it, or was it a fairly smooth process from start to finish writing this one?
Relatively smooth. I know a lot of the advice that you get from all the writers who are way better than me is, you know what, you just got to write. Like, the best way to write is just to write. You just neg it, but for me, I got to be in the right mood, and I've tried so many times that I will sit down and I'll be sitting there and it's just not working. But then every once in a while, and sometimes a lot of times that's why I like to do these contests and everything else, because I did back when I was in school, I did the same thing with projects and everything else. And again, don't recommend it to anybody, but just that last minute motivation that, all right, I got a deadline and it's coming, and it just lets you to cut through all the bull crap and just kind of go with, your natural inclination of, okay, this is what we're going to go with. And so for this one, that's kind of what it was. I mean, I probably started writing, I had 10 days, but it was maybe a week into that 10 days before I actually started writing this thing. And it just, so I didn't have a lot of time to really think back to, man, am I going to, does this work or not? I don't know. We're just going to go with it and see what happens. And I think it ended up okay, for the most part.
No,
lots of little nods. I do like the sometimes they're inadvertent. Like the McCready thing was totally inadvertent. Other things are actually intended. The lead overseer, Mr. Giles, that is absolutely a direct reference to Anthony Head's Buffy the Vampire Slayer character.
Nice, yeah.
Was a big Buffy fan growing up. The bit more obscure perhaps, but there's the part where he's talking about all the guys are having the competition to see who can come up with the different devices, like to try to capture this thing, like the man catchers and the Burma. That actually was meant as like a little throwback to, and I forget the author, but it might have been Hemingway. I don't know, the Most Dangerous Game.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that's like some of the stuff that the main character from that, as he's running around on the island trying to, with his knife, trying to come up with, those are a lot of the same things that he did, and that was actually meant to be a little aside to that. Yeah, so as far as actually just getting stuck on it, no, but only because I really didn't have time to get stuck on anything or to think about it too much, and so I sort of just had to blast through and kind of see what all shook out.
That's cool. And so looking back on it, is there anything you'd sort of change about it now?
As I mentioned, I would potentially want to try to. I think the pacing got a little messed up, a bit too much on the setup side in the front half. Just given all the background and everything, and then by the time that he actually gets to it, I think I had about 1,500 to 1,800 words left that I could write, and so just I would have liked a little bit more of a slow burn for the second half of that to kind of make that go a little bit, kind of tease out that tension and suspense a little bit longer. But other than that, I actually am pretty happy with this one, which is why I ended up kicking it over to you to discuss.
Oh, nice. Well, I'd say I appreciate it. So I mean, that's it for the story that you've written. But the other one you sent over was the Long List.
Yeah, yeah.
And this was another one I really enjoyed, so the Humboldt Lycanthrope one. And just to sort of save you explaining the story, again, links in the description, spoilers, etc., etc. But yeah, the general gist is that there is a detective who starts seeing the ghost of a young girl who was a victim in a case that he saw, and she starts telling him about her case and who he needs to kill, and it sort of escalates from there.
Yep.
Cool. So what is it about this pasta for you then? What made you send this one over?
So Humboldt is this guy is very dedicated to his craft. I think I mentioned that this story. So this wasn't the first story of his that I'd read, but it was probably within about the first month that I'd actually kind of gotten to know him and talked to him, and we started just exchanging notes and conversation and everything. And so we were actually in direct competition in this particular contest. My story for this was in the finals of the freestyle competition over on the wiki, and so this was his entry. Mine was a bad night. He beat me out, which he rightfully should have, because this thing was awesome. It's just so gritty, man. It's
yeah.
It's like so. And the interesting thing is, so the original character. I think in the version you were looking at, the crank cook was his name Possum.
Yeah.
Originally his name was Diesel, and I know exactly why Humboldt changed it, and that's because I'll plug him a little bit here. Last month, his debut novel, Kind Nepenthe, dropped. And there's a character in there named Diesel Dan, and so I think he just wanted to go back and change it. But anyway, it's so just. I mean, you feel grimy after reading this thing, and it is just, and that's honestly that's most of his stuff. He is this crazy bearded, possibly actual werewolf that lives out in the Northern California in the heart of weed country, off the grid. Growing, you got gardens and work generated and all this stuff that like he talks about. It's because he was kind of a hippie back in the day, like all this stuff, he writes what he knows, and man, it is just so good.
Yeah.
The way that he does it, and he is so much more dedicated to this than I wish I had half or a tenth of his just drive and motivation to improving my craft, as far as just taking classes from and I'm going to slaughter his name, but Chuck, the guy who wrote Fight Club, Palamuk. But so just all kinds of stuff to improve, and it's, this is one of his early stories, and he's gotten even better since then. But this one in particular, it struck a real chord with me. Probably partially because I was in direct competition with it, and I was sitting there reading it. They were all due the same day, and I had submitted mine. I'm sitting there reading it, and I turned to my wife and I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to win, and I'm okay with it because this is awesome." That's just that's really good. And so yeah, just everything about it. He does insane amounts of research. He brings in. He's got Hamlet references in here that he ties into the thing. And it's just it's very, very remarkably well done. And he does that with all of his writing. And I highly recommend checking out his other stuff as well, because it is you may be disturbed, but I assume that most people reading, creepypastas and horror stories, that's sort of what you're going for. So yeah, just you will not be disappointed if you check out his other stuff. So
Nice. No, I say, I mean, it's I think I've read one or two of his, but I'm definitely going to delve into some more if if they're like this, because I say I love this story.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what in particular do you think works well in this story?
This story in particular, I think the twist is pretty awesome at the end. I mean, just the notion that you start out. I mean, it's a pretty standard ghost story. Guy, again, hard-boiled kind of cop, starts getting visited by the ghost of a dead little girl. Except then at the end, you're not actually sure that he is seeing the ghost of a dead little girl. It may just be him having a mental break. And there's these little, the fact that he sprinkles in these little details, the fact that the detective's wife had a miscarriage, and so he's already kind of in a unstable mental place before finding this dead girl's body. Just these little hints here and there that you don't really know. It's just that I think to me is just really what did it, is that it really was sort of a surprising ending. Not that it was totally like, I mean, there was a twist, and half the time you're reading a creepypasta, you're kind of waiting for that shoe to drop, right? You're like, all right, where's the other twist? And not even that you didn't necessarily see that he was going to be going and doing it, but just I think that notion of, wow, this whole thing might be in his mind, because I don't think that that aspect of it, that you might think, okay, he's going crazy and the ghost is maybe lying to him, but the fact that, there maybe just isn't a ghost, that's really, to me, what just kind of was a little bit mind-blowing as far as the whole thing went. And then obviously just his prose is excellent. His descriptions are second to none, really. And I think, frankly, it's one of the best opening lines. I don't have it sitting in front of me, but something along the lines of, when she was 14, Melissa's father sold her to a crank cook named Possum for some meth and I don't know, it's just like
and a broken down Trans Am.
Yeah, there you go. That right there, that's a story in the first line. It's like, it's just like, okay, wow, that's awesome. And it just hooks you right away, and you're just there for the ride after that.
Nice, yeah. No, I agree with you on that one. I mean, especially with the it's all in his own mind thing. So it's so often it's used as kind of a get out almost. I mean, I've done it myself before in stories I've written where it's just sort of like, oh, and this whole thing was actually just his imagination, but it's just.
And then he woke up. I mean, it's the Bob Newhart show all over again. And then he woke up. It's like, oh.
Exactly. So how would you say that Humboldt Lycanthrope, how do you think he influences your own writing?
So definitely I've a couple of my more gnarly stories are directly because I know that I'm going to be competing against him. Her Red Right Hand is, so that's probably I've got two. So I mentioned Creepypasta XYZ is one of the newer sites. They've got this. I'm a little lucky because I'm pretty sure they won't accept any of his stories. Because they've got a 12 and up rating, and so I'm definitely sure that most of his exceed that. So I've got two stories that were not accepted by that site. One of them is Father's Love, which was completely, that was actually one of the few I did not write for a contest. But then Her Red Right Hand is one that a few people might know. Dr. Creepin did an excellent narration of. About 2 months ago, he did a collaboration with a whole bevy of awesome narrators, Swamp Dweller and GM Danielson. God, that guy is a friggin' gift. He voiced the villain in it, and Margbot and Unit 522, and just forgetting a couple of them, and so I apologize to those guys, but they just did a fantastic job. And so a few people have seen that one, and I basically, for that one, I was like, okay, I listened to the Nick Cave song, and I knew Humboldt was going to be writing one for this one. He wrote, I think it was Daddy's Little Princess, and that involves a girl that runs away from home and ends up hooking up with some vampires, and they're like hardlining like blood and all this and shooting vampire porn videos and all this stuff, and so that's like what I'm up against. And so I knew that it's like, okay, I got to take this somewhere a little bit more hardcore kind of a thing, because in order to try to stay at least, you know, in that shock value.
That's
and so,
yeah.
So that way he does, and then also just because, like I said, I absolutely admire his dedication to the craft. He's constantly trying to improve himself, and he's just very. I mean, he's very dedicated to the community. He's all about, you know, trying to bring more people in and to make connections and to just all this stuff. And so that aspect of it, just that his overall involvement and drive to become better and to get his stuff out there, that absolutely, I just admire that. And, you know, I try to emulate that a little bit. So
nice, yeah, that's cool. So so in terms of sort of like the creepypasta as a genre in general, I mean, what in your opinion makes a good creepypasta?
I think it's not as narrow of a genre as people kind of tend to, I don't know, think of it. But good style to me. Well, for one thing, it has to be good writing. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I don't even necessarily mean like flowery language or anything. Like purple prose is no good for anybody. But just as far as like, I need to be engaged, right? And I need to, if you've got all these grammatical errors and spelling errors, unless of course they're intentional, because I'll do that sometimes if a character is speaking in a dialect or something, you know, I'll purposely slaughter words or one way or the other. But it's just got to be good writing, and it's got to somehow immerse me as the reader into that world, and to kind of, whether it's this fan, and that's really true for any writing. I gotta believe that I'm in it, and it doesn't matter how outlandish the scenario is. If you write it well, then I'm gonna kind of get in there. As far as creepypasta in general, I think again either getting away from tropes or introducing them in new ways that maybe like to kind of put a fresh coat of paint on them. I think that's good, because you're not going to tell a serial killer story that's not like 100 other serial killer stories out there. I mean, you're just not. They're about a serial killer. But if there's a way that you can put your own little twist on it, and that's not because you've given them a striped neckerchief or, you know, something that, you know, like the whole, all those deadly pitfalls that so many first-time creepypasta writers they have this idea for an original character, and then they try to come up with the story. It's like, no. I write organically, but I have like an overarching framework of like what the story needs to be, and then my characters sort of evolve from the events of the story affects the characters. It's not the characters affecting the story, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of. You're not going to have, and that's kind of, I think, why some people don't necessarily. And again, not that everyone's opinion, like who cares about everybody's opinion? I mean, do what you want. But a lot of folks, I think, kind of turn their nose up at creepypasta because they see all of like these, oh well, this is just a Jeff the Killer ripoff, or this is just, you know, whatever, and, you know, just so many of these famous stories are not particularly well written. And they're not. You can take, even if they are the most original idea out there, if they're just crappy writing, then it's not going to do it for the vast majority of people that haven't. So I think just that notion of man, just you got to have good writing. The wiki, I used to be more involved on it, and I'm not anymore, just for time. But they have an excellent function where it's the writer's workshop. You can post stories on it, and you'll get feedback on it. And sometimes it'll be good, sometimes it'll be, you know, less good. But I mean, it's just kind of neat that for free you have people that are, you know, there that are willing to help kind of look at your stuff and let you know, hey, you know, I think this worked. I think there's a few users on the site that are very, very diligent about it. Christian Wallace is one of the admins over there. He gives excellent feedback. Probably the most hated man in creepypasta, MP Real, Invictive. It also does. I mean, God love MP, but mining the salt from his mines could just employ thousands, because but he gives very, I mean, he's very consistent, and he gives very good feedback as far, and he calls a spade, and it's like, hey, look, if your story is unoriginal or poorly written, or just fails to capitalize on, you're just hitting the same one note over and over again, he's going to tell you about it, and you need to go, if you want to improve, go fix these things, and and you'll do it. But so that's just in general as far as writing good creepypasta. Yeah, so good writing, and man, make it scary, like or at least make you, if not everyone has to be like this balls dropping, bedwetting kind of terrifying thing. Sometimes it can be quieter, sometimes if I make you think, and just sort of an uncomfortable truth that now it's sort of just sitting there in the back of your mind, and you're like, huh, man, I didn't really think about that before. That's okay too. Not all fear has to be equal. There are lots of different flavors of it.
Yeah. That's fair enough, and sort of with the scene in general. Obviously, like at the moment, it's becoming almost, dare I say it, mainstream with stuff like Channel Zero coming out, and obviously there's Slender Man's obviously broken through into the mainstream at this point. I mean, what are your thoughts on sort of the scene at the moment, sort of where it's heading? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it really kind of depends on the community. So it's fascinating because in some respects, like, there's aspects of it that are certainly breaking through into the mainstream. You mentioned Slender Man in more ways than one. I mean, you've got the actual just the creative stuff like Channel Zero and like there's all these Slender Man fan fics, but then you've got stuff like this Slender Man attempted murders kind of a thing. So that's, people are becoming more familiar with this stuff. But personally, I'm finding that a lot of like the major sites they seem to be experiencing less traffic nowadays. Like the wiki, a couple years ago, it had a lot more, it seems like, regular users and people contributing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Creepypasta.org is dead. Like completely. They still have stories come up. The submission process that they have is absolutely ridiculous. Just the way that they go about it. But it's just like there's nothing there. There's no community. One place that and part of the reason I do it, even though my stories aren't really, as I said before, they're not really the kind of bread and butter of the site. I feel like No Sleep is on Reddit is very, very strong, and that's probably right now like the go-to place. You've got folks from there who are having their series option. They are turning their stories into novels. One, and I forget which one, but one of the more prevalent users they're like writing for Netflix now. Like they're absolutely, somebody somewhere is kind of taking an interest, and they're saying, hey, there's this community out there that has all of this really great sort of vetted content, because I mean it's you've got the better stories tend to get literally thousands of people reading them and upvoting them, and so it's like, okay, that's we can see that there is an appeal here, and so that community is pretty awesome. Other ones, I mean, I've made a ton of friends. Like the wiki is still my home. It's always kind of going to be my home, even though I haven't been participating as much there recently. But made a ton of friends from there. People I talk to regularly, whether it's on the wiki or on Skype or Facebook or whatever else. But just great people, good authors. But yeah, I mean, so it's kind of interesting. I think that it's good that it's getting mainstream, but at the same time, it's not really. It's just it's the same. I mean, it's horror stories. Like at the end of the day, there's nothing other than the fact that creepypasta started on the internet, and so that was sort of the first organic internet urban legend stuff. I mean, that's all the difference is. It's just a different it's the same stories. It's just a different medium that they're being represented and shared in.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I think it's evolved in and of itself, is that you almost do have, you've got more of the, this is real life, and man, those just looking at the hit counts for all the narrators, if you want to make, you know, a whole bunch of hits as the narrators, it's absolutely by, you know, saying, I've got 3 tales of Thanksgiving terror, you know, like true story, like the true story stuff, absolutely. See, and Let's Not Meet, and those kind of stories tend to seem to get a lot more attention for whatever reason. But then you've got the other side of it, which is more my stuff and Humboldt stuff and MP's stuff, and just all these other authors that, you know, it's like, hey, look, we're horror authors. We have no intention of actually writing our stories that are going to make you think these are actually real. But this is the best sort of vehicle that we have right now that we can get our words that we've written in front of as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Without even in some cases with publishing, a bad night. I actually I ended up being altering a little bit, and they said they were fine with it, with me keeping it on the wiki and stuff. But I managed to sell it for like $20 to an e-zine called Crimson Streets. They do all like noir, you know, stuff, and so. But I honestly don't know if anybody read it like at all. Whereas then I can look on like creepypasta.xyz. One of the things that they do that's very cool that I wish the wiki would somehow figure out a way to adopt is you can actually see how many people have read your story. And so I can like go onto my account and I can see, oh, you know, 500 people have read my story, or 1,000 people have read my story, or whatever. And so that kind of thing. The other thing I do want to take just a quick second to talk a little bit about. It doesn't affect me at all, because other than that one story for $20, I have actually not made any money at all from any of my stories. But the whole, the demonetization of YouTube that's going on currently. Have you?
Oh, the adpocalypse.
yeah, that. So I'm kind of 2 minds about it. Like, all of my stories, like, again, I'm not in it for the money. I just want the satisfaction of knowing that people out there are like reading my stuff and enjoying it, hopefully. And man, I have the line on my wiki user page is feedback welcome, or let's see, criticism welcome, feedback appreciated, and that's absolutely true. Like, if you read my story, like it, hate it, whatever, just let me know what you think, because I'm going to, you know, take that to heart, and I'll, you know, if you have constructive criticism, I'm gonna work that into it. That being said, even though I'm not in it for the money, I know that there are lots of other folks that take, in particular, narrating these things, that is if not their livelihood, then it supplements it, right? Like, we're doing it for fun, but I mean, it takes time, it takes energy. You need to buy equipment to do the stuff that you're doing with this interview and everything else. Like, you can't, and so all of my stories are under. It's not the really open Creative Commons license where like anybody can adapt it for commercial purposes, but it's the one where it's the NC. It's like, hey, look, as long as you talk to me first, I don't care if you adapt it. That's fine.
Nice.
But for them, it's like, wow. So you're really digging into their livelihood because you're concerned that somebody might take offense because they clicked on a video that is clearly labeled like, you know, horror stories. You know, it's like nobody. And I mean, and at the end of the day, it's an audio narration. It's not like
you're not showing these things.
Yeah, it's not graphic images or, you know, anything that anybody with a Google, you know, like Google doesn't have age walls. You know, you can type whatever you want into a Google search bar and then click the videos tab and get anything. So I guess that just disappoints me a little bit as far as that goes, because again, YouTube is I love it whenever anybody adopts any of my work. It doesn't matter your talent level, it doesn't matter your skill level, whatever. I mean, I've got any narration that I come across of any of my work, I put it on my wiki page, just because it's like I appreciate that people. I mean, I'm not the best writer out there. Not everybody is the best video editor out there. I appreciate everything everybody's doing to try to promote this community. And so it really does bother me that there seems to be like this bias against it for really no reason. because they have things like an age wall. I mean, require them to put up, type in how old they are. If they're going to lie about it, well, okay, then that's on them.
Yeah.
But so that's really unfortunate, because I know some of the narrators. I've seen. I know it seems like it's this thing that sort of like happens every once in a while. Like a couple months ago, it happened, and everybody was like up in arms about keeping YouTube creepy and everything. And then it sort of died down for a while, and people got sponsors back, and the train started rolling a little bit. And then like 2 days ago, all of a sudden my Twitter feed just blowing up with like all these people like, oh my god, like YouTube, we did it again, just like crazy. And it's just and as a writer, I'm just like, man, that sucks, because I would like this is just one more way for me to get my work out to people. And again, it's cool because I just write the words on the page. I have some of these people, really talented voice actors that are sharing their craft, and they're using my words to do it. That is so cool. So that's kind of disappointing to me, and I hope that as it becomes more mainstream, I don't know if I think it's Vimeo or video. There's like another. They're trying to compete with YouTube.
Oh,
and it's
vid.me, is it?
Yeah, that one. I mean, it's nowhere near that level yet. I mean, it's like I don't know a good analogy, but it's not. I mean, they're not YouTube or anything close to it. But the notion that, hey, there might be some other places to go to try to do this. I mean, maybe that's the answer, maybe not. But I think there's a market for it. I really do. And the fact that there's so many people that like horror. I mean, you see that. I mean, golly, it just broke every September record known to man, in one weekend. So there's obviously people that like getting the crap scared out of them. And so, I really hope that there is a way that we can do it, and I hope that some of these communities people start finding these communities again and start participating and sharing their stories and their visions and their words and everything else, because otherwise I think I don't know where it's going to go from here.
No, that's fair enough. I'd say that's an interesting take on it. As I say, 'cause, as I've had a lot of people sort of who aren't a fan of narrations and things like that, but it is interesting, because it is a way of getting your work out there.
Absolutely, I agree. I see it all the time on actually on No Sleep, the one that I've been singing their praises about the community and stuff. But there on the Attic. So one of my big beefs with it is that you always, like, if you post there, any comments that you make you have to treat the events as real. Okay, fine. But there is the out of character board that they have that a lot fewer people know about, I think. But basically it's just a message board that you can post anything you want to, and you can discuss stories where you can stop the pretension of that they're real or whatever else. And it seems like every week or two, somebody's posting something like, oh my gosh, like this narrator or that narrator, just took this work, and I don't think that they got, they're putting it out too fast, or it's like, okay, look, man, what are you complaining about? Like they're getting your work out there. The odds that somebody is going to find your work just off of, if you keep it in this one set location, maybe somebody will find it, maybe they don't. As long as you have, I mean, the internet's got records going back to forever. So if it actually became a thing where, oh my God, you have the next Star Wars on your hand or something, and then, it's like, well, it's this, huge property, and, you need to prove that, well, there's records going back that show that, that this was your original idea, and, that you can sue the crap out of them for royalties or whatever else. But that's never going to happen if nobody discovers your work. So, I don't know. And honestly, having had a bunch of my stuff narrated and everything else, I'll tell you that I have not yet been. I've got not a ton of views. Again, Mr. Creepypasta, I think, averages somewhere in the hundreds, 100,000 views. Joel over at Let's Read is awesome. He's got some great. He's got like 50,000 hits or something. I mean, that's a lot of people. The number of folks that have directly contacted me to say, hey, wow, we really love your story, we'd like to use it for something, 0. So it's just, and I think just enjoy it for what it is. Get your stuff out there. If you don't want people to read and adapt it, I don't know, just maybe try to sell it to a publisher or something. Don't publish it for free on the internet.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
That's cool, man. Well, so, I mean, those are all my questions I had. As I say, I want to thank you for coming on. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's been really good. I mean, just to finish off, I'll give you some time. Is you got anything you want to plug? Where can people find you? Like anything you want people to know?
Okay, sure. So again, you can find my stories on pretty much any creepypasta website that's out there. Creepypasta Wiki. Absolutely recommend people get on there. Don't feel bad if MP rips you down because he does it to everybody. My Twitter is ShadowSwimmer77. Feel free to follow me on there. I post very regularly. But if I do get a new story up or I find a new narration of my work, I usually try to throw a tweet, and everything else out there if you like it. Check out the Wicker Saga. I am going to finish it, I promise, to anybody that actually has been reading it. It might take me a while just because of my very just non-traditional methods of writing, but I do have ideas. It is going to happen eventually. And then also, because I drug a story in here, Matthew Brockmeyer, Kind Nepenthe on Amazon. It is a fantastic read. If you like the long list, it is basically... there's no detectives in it, but it is this crazy story of there's pot growing and old biker ghosts and death and murder and drugs and all kinds of cool stuff. It's a fantastic read, so definitely check that out if you want to. So and that's it. And thank you so much for having me, Simon. I really do.
It's not a problem at all. I'd say it was a pleasure talking to you. And again, if you ever want to come on again, just let me know.
Sounds good, man. Yeah, we'll. If I have something else to talk about, so.
Keep me posted, man. Well, thanks a lot for that. I say appreciate it.
Sounds good. Take care. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Cheers. So there you are. There's my interview with ShadowSwimmer77. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, check the description if you like what you've heard to check out any of his other stuff and find him online. Otherwise, feel free to head on over to insertpastapunhere.com where you can find my writing and also a load of these interviews. And and check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/insertpastapunhere. I'll have another interview for you guys next week, and it's also a good one. So I'm particularly looking forward to this. So I will see you guys then. Have a good one.